Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to join us the very first or GW4 WSA webinar in 2022. So we are changing. We have some slight change in terms of time slot, in terms of registration. I hope we are making things much easier for you, and we hope we will be able to organize some face-to-face seminar in the near future. So if you are close to the event venue, we're more than welcome to participate in the event. So we will keep you informed regarding the upcoming events. And today we are very happy to have Dr. Sarah Ward from the Westcountry Rivers Trust. She's been working on this during this pandemic situation. She's been working on this project, Connecting the Culm. It's a very impressive work she has done, and she will be going to share the experience she has done with us today. So she will give you the presentation, and if you have any questions during her presentation, you are more than welcome to put your question in the chat, or you can ask your question directly after her talk. So hand to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Albert. Yes, hello everybody. Welcome to the first webinar of the new year. I'm just going to share my screen and hope the technology works. We have tested it, so fingers crossed everything will go swimmingly. Okay, so I'm just going to change into slideshow mode, and hopefully you can see that. Excellent, thanks Albert.
Oh, good.
So hi everybody. Yeah, I'm Dr. Sarah Ward from Westcountry Rivers Trust, and as Albert said, the Connecting the Culm project's been going on for almost well, actually 2 years now, but it only feels like a year. And that's why I've put in the title of my presentation, an online year in the life of the Connecting the Culm project, because it really only feels like we've been doing it sort of, intensively for a year because of the pandemic. And as Albert mentioned, I work at the Westcountry Rivers Trust, but the Connecting the Culm project is actually a partnership project and a project across many partners, which I'll touch on shortly. But just to talk a little bit about the Westcountry Rivers Trust to begin with. So the Westcountry Rivers Trust cares for the rivers, streams, brooks, estuaries and wetlands in the West Country. It was established in 1994, and it helps to protect, preserve, develop and improve the region's water environments. So it's about looking at the value of natural resources around water in the landscape, but also inspiring and educating, understanding and awareness of how our daily lives and our societies and our economies interact with those environments. And I sit within the evidence and engagement team at the WRT, and I've been there since October 2020. So I literally joined WRT sort of just as we were coming out of some of the most difficult parts of the pandemic, when the Connecting the Culm project had already been instigated for a year. So it's been a bit of a steep learning curve, but it's been really enjoyable. And just a little bit about my background, I guess, for context. So before joining the Westcountry Rivers Trust, I was at the University of the West of England, and I was doing research on water resilience and communities. That was for a couple of years. And then before that, I was at the University of Exeter, where I actually worked with Albert in the Centre for Water Systems, doing, again, lots of stuff on water resources, alternative water supply systems and resilience and sustainability. But focusing on the project of the topic of this presentation, which is the Connecting the Culm project, and it's an Interreg 2Cs project, part of the Co-Adapt overarching programme. And it's focusing on climate impacts and adaptation, and that's specifically understanding and improving resilience of the Culm catchment as a whole, both to flood and to drought. And the catchments based in the sort of Blackdown Hills and Devon and Somerset area, so that's where we are sort of geographically. And under the Interreg Co-Adapt funding, we've got about £200,000 for demonstrating nature-based solutions. So one of the main focuses of the project is nature-based solutions and how those can improve resilience to both drought and flooding in the catchment. Layered into that, we have the co-creation of those solutions, so co-creation of nature-based solutions, but also the co-creation of what we call the blueprint for the Culm. And the blueprint for the Culm is a long-term vision, but also a delivery and, if you will, action plan to really operationalise and put into place adaptations across the catchment in relation to a number of different themes and geographies. So the overarching sort of mission is to create a better future for the River Culm, and that includes the people, the environment, and all of the things that live and work around the river and its tributaries. So in the little Venn diagram there, it just shows how co-creation, nature-based solutions, and climate change adaptation are all coming together and are all key things that we're looking at under the Connecting the Culm project. So funding wise, 40% comes from local partners and 60% comes from the overarching Interreg project. And that Venn diagram sort of alludes slightly to the complexity, which I'm going to start to unpack in this presentation and in the next few slides, of this integrated system. We know catchments represent lots of different subsystems. And here, diagrammatically and in words, I'm just illustrating 7 of the work packages that we have to sort of categorize and quantify and label, if you will, those different subsystems within the Culm catchment and then within the Connecting the Culm project. So work packages, or lots as we call them, 1 and 4, they're focused on co-creation and evaluation. So they're kind of the overarching underpinning work packages, if you will. And then interconnected with those, we've got catchment modelling, hydrological modelling, natural flood management and nature-based solutions, education and habitat monitoring. So there's all these different things going on within the project. And you can see a bit more of that complexity here, where we start to build the links and the connections between building the understanding, which is what the modelling and the monitoring focuses on. So that's highlighted in the sort of blue bubbles, and that's about being evidence-based and taking a kind of data and knowledge approach. And then we have the red bubbles, which are co-creation. So as you can see, co-creation really does connect in and join up everything that's going on in the project. And then we have in green those NBS, those nature-based solution interventions. So at this part, within this project, we're only looking at pilot and demonstration interventions and the co-delivery and the co-creation of those. And what the Connecting the Culm project does in an overarching way is takes that whole system approach, which I've mentioned, in a collaborative, participatory, adaptive, change-focused and reflexive way. So hence the need for all of these different mind maps and flow charts to really understand how all of these things are connected. So I touched on the geography, and this slide just emphasises that a little bit more. So the top right hand side, hopefully you can see Exeter, so the city of Exeter, and the catchment, the Culm catchment sort of finishes just on the outskirts of Exeter in an area called Stoke Cannon, and that's where the River Culm joins the River Exe. And then the River Exe comes down to Exmouth, which is actually where I am located and talking to you from today, and that's where the River Exe meets the sea. So from Stoke Cannon, stretching sort of eastward and towards Somerset and the Blackdown Hills, the Culm takes this shape in terms of the catchment and the cities, the towns, the roads, the railways, all of the different features that sit within the catchment. And the catchment in terms of the project is broken down into the demonstration zones illustrated in the bottom right map. So you can see the border of the catchment there in red. So where it's got floodplain, that's sort of the Exeter Stoke Cannon area. Then we have the mid-catchment zone. That's around the sort of Clumpton area, if people are familiar with that geography. And then it takes it over more towards the east. And over to the headwaters around villages of Willand, Hemyock and Uffculm. And so taking that catchment and the boundaries as a whole, the first stage of the project was very much to kind of look at what we know now, gather all of the data and evidence for various aspects of the catchment, And that data collection, modelling and synthesis process was called the Environmental Evidence Review, and that was done by colleagues at the Westcountry Rivers Trust and also JBA Consulting, who did the modelling for the project. So excuse me, this was the early stages of the project. This was before the pandemic sort of really took hold. So the big focus was getting all of this environmental and demographic data together to produce lots and lots and lots of maps, which could then be layered into a modelling tool, and that then allows some investigations to be and some analysis to be run on different nature-based solutions from a modelling point of view, based on all of the soil, the hydrology, the water resources, carbon elements of the catchment. So all of that information is layered into that environmental evidence review, which is quite a hefty PDF document, but also there is an interactive tool, which I've put the link in the presentation for there. And as you can see on the right hand side of the little screenshot of the tool, it's interactive in that you can turn layers on and off, and so that enables people to look at different interventions and see where they are geographically, but also the impact that those have on those different layers, basically. So that was the underpinning for the kind of knowledge in terms of the catchment and the physical and environmental side of things. But also layered into that, and what I'm more going to focus on today is the sort of social, the engagement, the co-creation side. And underpinning that, we had to have a similar approach, you know, in terms of mirroring the monitoring and the modelling and the data collection and the knowledge collection from the environmental evidence review. So underpinning that on the more social and engagement side, and relating to people and places within the catchment, the underpinning and overarching approach that we used was called a theory of change. Now, hopefully some people have heard of that, not everybody will have, but a theory of change is an approach to planning, participation and evaluation that promotes social and environmental change. And what it aims to do is to take a specific situation, highlight the priorities and the audiences, so that might be stakeholders, that might be communities of geography or location or interest, highlight those, and then understand the resources available, what barriers there are, what opportunities there are, and then from that aims to facilitate attitudinal and behavioural change, as well as promoting advocacy. And that's through activities, so it could be events, it could be pop-up shops, it could be all of these different things that sort of disseminate information, but also aim to engage people in a two-way conversation. And then the next layer onto that is to co-create things from the offset. So within the theory of change, you set high level sort of ambition and aim and aspiration, and then you map back from that the things that you need in order to get to that point. So part of the monitoring and evaluation, which I'll come on to later in the presentation, obviously orientates around things like inputs and outputs, and we quantify and we sort of keep track of those in qualitative ways as well, using different measures and metrics. And then we set up different outcomes that we're aiming to achieve, and we monitor the impacts again through different metrics. So in the bubble on the right hand side, you can just see some example of those sort of output metrics that we might commonly be familiar with. So attendees at events, so for example, everybody that's registered here, there will be some data associated with that. We might have some interactive web tools, and there are some analytics that sit behind those that we can monitor how people are engaging, and also the ways in which they're finding out about those things. And then things like newsletter sign-ups and survey responses are quite sort of familiar. And then layered into that, we might have these outcomes that I've talked about, and the metrics around those might be, for example, 80% of people say that they feel empowered in order to take action, or in terms of an impact, we might see that there's enhanced participation in visioning exercises and sessions. And these are some of the things that I'll come back to when I talk about monitoring evaluation later in the project. But just to sort of frame that a little bit more in terms of the Connecting the Culm project. So the top right here, you can just see the overarching theory of change sort of statement that we have for the project, which is supporting social change by connecting multiple professional and citizen communities across the Culm catchment to co-create the blueprint for the Culm and nature-based solutions to respond to climate and environmental change. So that sounds quite complex and quite challenging, but once we start to break it down a little bit more into things like the impacts and outcomes that I've mentioned, it starts to become more manageable. So here in purple on the right, I've got the aims and the targets for the project. So under the Co-Adapt project and the EU Interreg funding side of things, we had some high level, obviously, targets that we needed to achieve through the project, but also we layered into that some additional things that we wanted to see achieved in terms of outcomes. So what this slide demonstrates is the project and activity level logic model, or log frame. Some people may be familiar with slightly different terms. And what this does is this charts different and maps different activities. So what you're intending to do on the project with the outputs that might be produced. So for example, for today's event, I've produced a PowerPoint, and I might have also produced some additional interactive materials to share with you. And so from the outputs of that, we might get different numbers of people participating in workshops. We might contribute to local, as it says there, cultural programs. You might not be able to see the fine detail. Apologies, you'll be able to see that in the presentation as it comes round. And then that maps onto those outcomes and what we expect and what we think will happen after those activities have taken place. So that those activities and those events engender some sort of interaction and participation from people, and co-creation if that's part of the intention of that activity. But that process goes on longer than the activity itself. So it's going to have some sort of interaction with what people do and what people think and what their behaviours might be after the event. And so those are the outcomes and the impacts that we're looking to introduce and to create change through. So in terms of the project, it might be things like higher profile of the project across the catchment, so more people are aware of the project and might start to get involved in the project. People might have additional knowledge that they didn't have before, an understanding of the catchment and the river and the challenges and opportunities and issues that the catchment and the river and its tributaries face. But also they might enhance their appreciation of things like nature-based solutions. So people might not have heard of nature-based solutions before, and they might start to pick away a little bit of their understanding of how that interacts with climate pressures that they may have already heard of, and other kind of mitigation and adaptation things which are starting to become a little bit more mainstream, and narratives are emerging around that are a little bit easier for people to engage with. So those are then mapped onto the impacts, and those kind of things are the wider societal things, and those track back to that theory of change sort of overarching statement. And that's where we want to see real change in different ways. So for example, increased ability to do different things in a self-driven way, because self-efficacy, so people's perceived ability to do things has improved, so people feel able to get more involved or empowered to get more involved in different things. And so this underpins the activities that I'm going to talk about. And also from the Co-Adapt side, we have this framing and the production of this framework where we use the terms knowledge tools, transition tools, and co-creation tools. So knowledge tools focus on those kind of things that most people will be familiar with. So where we're conveying or disseminating information or data in order to kind of produce knowledge or convey and develop knowledge. Transition tools are where we're trying to do a little bit beyond that. So we're taking some of that knowledge, we're enabling interactions with it and interactivity with it in order to help support change. And then co-creation tools are much more about actually co-designing and co-producing things with people. So starting off with activities that get people on board from the beginning and co-design and co-create either products or outcomes or various different things. So what I should say in relation to that, so in the top or bottom right hand side, you'll see little bubbles where I'm just highlighting which of those co-adapt framework tools I'm talking about at the time. And so in terms of co-creation, just to expand a little bit on the nature-based solutions. So for those that might not be familiar with them, so we're thinking about things that restore natural catchment performance. So this might be re-wetting peatlands or mires or enhancing the health of soils to enable them to perform their functions more effectively. Also restoring natural processes, so that might include floodplain restoration or scrapes, which are shallow depressions, installing those on the floodplains so that the river can basically behave more naturally and do what it would normally do. And some of the nature-based solutions like ponds and different interventions can attenuate and disrupt flows. So woody dams, for example, I don't think I've got a picture in this presentation, apology, of a woody dam. So if you're not familiar with that, that's where the flood, so debris is placed in a designed manner within a river channel, and that's designed to hold the flow back when the river is, you know, almost at sort of bank full capacity and is going to burst its bank. So that helps to retain water and spread it into the floodplain and reconnect it with those other sort of things that I've mentioned there about floodplain reconnection and those kind of things. And as well as the nature-based solutions, as I mentioned, the blueprint for the Culm, which is this long-term vision, was also something that we wanted to co-create, and that is focused on actions around reducing flooding, protecting farmland soils, ensuring that there are cost savings, so economic benefits for everybody, improving the water quality, and that sort of leading ultimately to a better environment for wildlife and humans in the catchment. So humans and non-human animals benefiting and having a more enjoyable, functional and attractive place to live. And the key stakeholders that we focused on within the project are the sort of professional stakeholders, so the key authorities, landowners and farmers, so those stakeholders with an ability to install and co-design nature-based solutions actually on their land to actually enable us to implement some of those demonstrations and those pilots, and then the communities in and around those sort of really vulnerable areas of the catchment that were picked up in the environmental evidence review. So focusing now much more on the co-creation side of things, and you can see here that in February 2020 engagement and co-creation began in the form of getting out into village halls in different locations in the catchment, setting up different information boards. This was when the project first started, so raising awareness of the project, inviting people along to find out a little bit more so that we could do some stakeholder mapping and see how communities are aware of, understand, interact with, engage with, view, have history around and connections with the river, the tributaries, the catchment, etc. So this was starting to scratch the surface, and then of course, bam, COVID hit, and it was sort of March 2020. And this was before I joined the project, but you know, I've absorbed all the stories from the team because it's very much a team effort across Devon County Council, the Blackdown Hills Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, Devon Biodiversity Records Centre, us at Westcountry Rivers Trust, a few independents, and then there are sort of steering members from the Environment Agency, from the Forestry Commission, lots of different organisations. So in March 2020, we had to pause and think, okay, what can we do given we're in lockdown? So there was a real COVID rethink, as I phrased it here, as to what we could do if we couldn't go out into those village halls, if we couldn't just have pop-up stands in communities to talk to people just, you know, walking down the street or next to their river, which was flooding at the time. So some staff actually went on furlough during that time as well. So things only really began picking up again in October 2020, which was when I joined the project. And people were starting then to come back off furlough. So some of the nature-based solution work, which had really been paused since March, started to pick up again. And so we refocused, and a plan was drawn up. So my colleague Nick Paling at the Westcountry Rivers Trust, plus Stephen Johnson, the project manager, and Dominic Ackland, who's working on the blueprint side of things, came together and started to think about, okay, how can we move everything online? And quite a lot had already been done elsewhere, and we were starting to see a shift in terms of people's use, awareness of, and access to different technology. So we started to focus on engagement, volunteering, and of course the co-creation side of things. So this is just a bit of a summary, an overall view of what we did in those areas. So events, workshops, school sessions and resources. We did manage some visits later on, which I'll touch on a bit later in the presentation, and attended some local shows that started coming back online in sort of summer 2021. So initially online events and comms through the newsletter and social media, so Facebook, Twitter, they were our main points of engagement and communication. And then we started to pick up more on the citizen science side, as well as some community-led action through some really keen and passionate people that started to come to the fore at some working groups and some catchment adaptation workshops. And so we started to co-create momentum through all of those online events and sort of conversations starting tools. So we started sharing the science, opening up conversations and welcoming discussions. So the first main event post-COVID arriving was held in October. So that was the Discover the River Culm, an evening of river science and exploration event. And that was to, as it says there, sort of get conversations started around the environmental evidence review. So talking about soils, talking about beavers, talking about crayfish. So all of the things that may be slightly familiar to people, but starting to unpack those in the context of some of the challenges to the catchment, like flooding and drought going forward. So we held in about the first 9 months after we started things up again, about 22 different online events. So as it says there, historic landscape, climate resilience also featured. And we were quite lucky to have some guest speakers from all across those different topics, including Dr. Freya Gary from the Met Office and Rob Hopkins from the transition movement. So they were quite crucial in one of the later climate resilience focused online events, and Rob actually guided participants through some catchment visioning workshops later in the process as well. So when we'd introduced a bit more of the concept of the blueprint, what it was for, what it aimed to do, we were able to then engage people with Rob's what if scenarios and process, if people are familiar with that. So it's taking 5 minutes to basically have a dream in the future, in the quiet, with your eyes closed, and just going, what if? And you suspend reality and you just think about what if people walk to work every day and those kind of things. How different our future and our environment would be if those what ifs came true. So across those 22 events, we had about 750 online attendees. We also introduced, as I said, the website and newsletters and different social media at that point. And then we started to be able to continue those conversations and build relationships with people that were regularly coming to events, that were sort of volunteering their time for the working groups in different ways and through different approaches. So at that point, we started to co-create and share stories, educational resources, videos and games. So this is just sort of a subset of things that you might find if you went to the Connecting the Culm website. So we've got a library there that hosts videos that people have done out in the catchment. So Derek Boustrud, one of the citizen science volunteers, he's got a couple of videos on there taking us through how he's been collecting rainfall data and water quality data. We've got other people that monitor and take videos of flooding when it happens up in the headwaters of the catchment. And then through the educational work, our educational specialist, Kat Farnell, because she couldn't go into schools at the time, she had to think of some other creative tools that could be used when we were eventually able to go back into schools. So as well as workshops, she came up with this Slow the Flow board game. So it's a board game that takes you, and you can just sort of see the path of the river there. It takes you down the River Culm, and you get problems coming up when you roll the dice, and then you have to come up with a solution, and it explains all of the different nature-based solutions in language that's understandable for sort of Key Stage 2. And as well as that, we developed a creative Culm theme, and that was with a local artist, so Richard Carman, whose illustrations I'll come to shortly, and Claire Viner, who's a storyteller who lives in the catchment. And she went out and she started to do lots of research into the history of the river, where its name comes from, the kind of myths, the legends, but also the archaeology and the geography and the science behind it, and weave those stories together, which you can read all about in her blogs, and a recording of an event where she told the stories online just before Christmas. And one of the main tools that we created in order to get people involved in interacting with the nature-based solutions, because at this point, because the nature-based solution delivery and co-design work had been paused during lockdown, we didn't have any demonstrations or pilots that people can go out and put wellies on and stamp around in the mud for. So at that point, with the help of Richard Carman, the local artist, we illustrated the catchments, so you can see the different layers of the illustrations there, and how the architecture of the tools works. So we created these iVisits, or interactive virtual spatial solutions investigations tools. So it's an illustration that's then imported into ThingLink, and different vignettes showing problems and solutions, which you can see flood risk to properties and rain gardens in the example that I've shown there, linked within ThingLink so that people can click on them, read a little bit more, and then swap over to the sort of future visions that people had created through the catchment visioning workshops that I mentioned earlier. So we looked at the present, and then we looked at the future out into 2050, and what those what ifs would look like in the catchment, and how they might change, how the catchment might function. So allowing the river to spread across the floodplains, how that might look visually, as well as in terms of the data that we have from the modelling. And we managed to get about over 650 interactions. Those, the little graph that you can see at the bottom, is just a measure of how people have interacted with the different elements within those iVisit tools. And then we started to be able to do a little bit more. So we, in terms of co-creating capacity, we were able to take the Westcountry Westcountry Rivers Trust Westcountry Citizen Science Investigations, or CSI, scheme, which is a water quality monitoring scheme that's self-guided. So you get given a kit, and you can then go out and test for pH, phosphate, turbidity, those kind of parameters. So that started to be able to pick up, because people were able to then go out, if it was part of their daily exercise, bearing in mind we were only allowed out once a day on our own or with one other person for exercise. So, you know, these are all the constraints to have in the back of your mind when thinking about how we were looking to engage people and co-create things with people. So that was able to pick up again, and we managed to get 21 Culm citizen science volunteers. They've taken over 95 samples between July and December, so obviously a lot more around that. And through talking with people at various online events and workshops, there was some enthusiasm around the invasive species Himalayan balsam. So a group of people out in the headwaters of the community decided to establish the Himalayan Balsam Action Group, or HBAG. So we've got around 30 people, slightly more than that now, volunteers that go out, survey the river and some tributaries, map where the Himalayan balsam is causing a problem. So it's an invasive species that's responsible for bank destabilization, and it can take over from other species. So one of the ways to attack it basically is to pull it up and squash it or take it away from the riverbank before it seeds. And there's certain times of year and season when that has to be done in order to stop seeds obviously falling in the river, spreading downstream, etc. So they've been really crucial at surveying, mapping, and doing some what we call balsam bashing and pulling events in the catchment this year. And in terms of the data from the water quality monitoring CSI side of things, all of the data that's collected by the volunteers goes into a platform called Cartographer, and that then enables the production of these scorecards. So that's something that the community can then look back on and sort of say, okay, we've collected this data, we now know the health of our local part of the river. We can see it's a traffic light system, so we can see where we can maybe take some local action to improve this aspect or this aspect of the water quality and the health of our river. And then back to the blueprint. So all of this activity was feeding in to the blueprint. So thinking about the health of the river, getting people involved with different activities to then feed into a kind of action plan and a vision for the future of the river in the catchment, which is this blueprint entity. And so the events that we held in relation to the blueprint were a forum. So that was every 3 months we would get together and get people's sort of input and knowledge and ideas and thoughts and concerns and anything really that had come up in that time, but then try and channel that into a more co-creative process through working groups of focusing on different geographies, so those 3 areas that I mentioned, but also different themes, so around water quality, access, flooding, nature-based solutions, those kind of things. We also have a professional stakeholder panel, so that's organisations in the catchment or nationally that have an ability to take action or help support different things going on in the catchment. And then we had these adaptation engagement and workshops, the catchment visioning workshops, and also starting in June 2021, so I've got to get the years right because it's all a bit mixed up, we were able to then go back into schools and do some school sessions. So you can see the forum launch poster here and the mural, which we used quite a lot, screenshot of just some of the ways that we used mural to interact through getting thumbs up and thumbs down on different things within the online sessions. So in terms of the schools work, Kat was able to go out into 5 schools, which was really good across the catchment, and over 300 children and 34 staff participated in those sessions. And you can just see some of the activities in the photos there, looking at Richard's illustrations next to the river, which kind of brings them alive a bit more, and then plotting post-it notes on different parts of a kind of future catchment that might have some drought or some flooding in it, and thinking about what the children can do. And that 9-month process then led us to be able to put together a blueprint vision. So although I've realized the title isn't right there, so this says draft blueprint vision, this is now the final vision. So I updated it with the actual vision that was finalized at the last forum with the communities. So the vision for the blueprint is the River Culm will be celebrated as a lifeline that connects people with each other and with nature. Land across the catchment will be managed to protect and enhance the river while sustaining people's livelihoods. Throughout the seasons, and as the climate changes, the River Culm will have a space to flow naturally and safely. The water will run clear, wildlife will flourish, and people will easily access and enjoy all of these benefits. So this is something that came from all of these workshops and events and communities. So even though we were doing it online, there was still a real passion and a real enthusiasm and a real connection for all of the different things that people engage with and gain from the river and the landscape around it. And we also tested some interventions, and the 14 that you can see here listed, I won't go into them all, were those that were most popular. So we had, I think, about 28 different what ifs and responses from people in total, but these were the 14 that, through those sort of deliberative and Delphi style consensus generating activities through the mural, were really honed in on by all of the people that attended. And then in terms of the Nature-Based Solutions, so Dan Halford, who was the Nature-Based Solutions specialist and the land advisor and the farm advisor, he went out and co-created different designs with farmers and landowners and organisations, and we're trying to expand that out into communities now. Actually looking at what could be done on different people's land. So he held lots of meetings and discussions. He drafted the co-designs, took them back to them. And then, of course, you have to put in applications and consent. So at some point, you have to have a final design, which has to, be approved and then put into place with some monitoring plans. So all of that started to happen in summer 2021, so only just last year. And then the co-delivery of those with the various partners started to happen. So some of the things that are included in the designs that were co-created are things like woody dams, water retention ponds, tree planting, so that's field and orchards, earth bunds, hedgerows, and then things down to floodplain restoration and the wetland scrapes. So we have a separate webinar that was made in conjunction with the National Trust, and that focuses on the Killerton estate, the link to which is there. And that talks about their vision for the sort of next 50 years as well, but also the green recovery funded plans that are going on now. And that's includes these scrapes, some tree planting and some floodplain restoration. So if you want to know more, then please do tune into that webinar. So as I mentioned, then back in summer last year, we started to be able to connect back with the real world, and we were able to participate in some outdoor face-to-face events. Again, people started becoming a bit more confident and a bit fed up, to be honest, with being not able to do anything, and there was quite a lot of nervousness around what we could do, but we were conscious that people were really fed up of online events and had reached sort of saturation point, so we needed to get out back into the communities where all these things were starting to happen. So we came up with this Festival of the Culm program, and that was across geography and across time. So rather than having it just in one place at one time, which with COVID rules and regulations would have been really tricky anyway, we decided to spread it out across the catchment and across different months, so that there was always something going on to remind people that the project was still there and the river was still there and they could still connect with what was going on. So there was a lot of third-party events that we were able to have a stand and participate in different activities. So just some photos there from the Honiton show, the Mid Devon show, the Clumpton Autumn Festival, and the Clumpton engagement days, which happened sort of between June and October last year. We reached about 400 people through those different events. So that's a whistle-stop tour through everything that we did in terms of the online and eventually offline year in the life of the project, but then bringing it back to the kind of theory of change and that implementation of the monitoring and evaluation, because in terms of the project and knowing how we're getting along, we're doing all this stuff, but actually, how's it going? Are we meeting our targets apart from anything for the funders, but also are we co-creating that change and that shift that we're really hoping to transition? So that's why I bring it back to the logic model that I introduced at the beginning, and just to remind people of those aims and targets. So each December, the project has done a massive taking stock exercise. So sort of November, December time, we start to look at all of the different data that's coming in through some of those tools that I've mentioned. So whether it's through Cartographer, which is the water quality CSI platform, whether it's through Mural, through the online engagement tools that we've been creating, whether it's through Google Forms, through some surveys, and Maptionnaire, which is a GIS-based sort of survey questionnaire tool as well. So gathering all of the different analytics that sit behind those, and including HubSpot, which is kind of like a client relations management sort of database where you can monitor which stage in their journey people are at, as well as knowing which newsletters have been interacted with, how people are interacting with the newsletters, these kind of things. So there's a lot of analytics and a lot of data going on behind. And what these graphs and maps show is just some of that. So the top left-hand side is what sits behind the website, and it's through Avada's Jetpack Analytics, which just shows us how people are interacting with the website. And you can see that big spike. That's November, and that's when our November forum happened. So we then understood that that forum was actually quite crucial in how people then went and started to go and find out more about the project, or the kinds of things on the website that they were looking at and interacting with. And then through Eventbrite, we were able to set up some custom questions in the registration. So we asked people what they were interested in, how they heard about the events, and also a little bit about who they were. So we then had a real understanding of going forward, okay, we need to do maybe some events around flooding, around nature-based solutions, about water quality. We know that the newsletter is really reaching people, so is Facebook, but actually Twitter, people aren't really finding out about events through that. So how can we shift those kind of things? And all of this, of course, feeds into the co-adapt project reporting as well. And then through some other surveys and questionnaires that we did both online and at the face-to-face events. So we had, took devices out, iPads and phones, and we were able to get people to complete surveys and questionnaires there. And that gave us an insight into whether people were supportive of nature-based solutions and which kind of interventions that they were either not really bothered about, so no strong opinion on, or were really very supportive of in terms of implementation in the Culm catchment. And as I've shown in the previous slide, there's a lot of that going on. So we came up with this monitoring and evaluation dashboard, and that just helped us put together all of these things in a slightly more organized fashion, and in relation to the blueprint, in relation to participation in nature-based solution co-creation and those kind of things. So the greens that you can see here in the column on the right-hand side, those are, we've achieved that target that we had. Amber is obviously, we need to do a little bit more work, and then red is, okay, these need to be our focus areas for the next 6 months or the next 12 months of the project. And although those are obviously numeric metrics, we still have to tie that back to those more qualitative outcomes and impacts. So although we know we involved over 900 people, we actually involved over 1,000 people. What actually sits behind that in terms of encouraging champions and encouraging involvement, and people feeling empowered to do things, and people feeling that they can get involved and are able to. So just a few summary statistics that I've blown up on the right there in terms of web views. So really good that we had over 20,000 web views, over 150 survey responses, 400 newsletter signups. In total, last year we did 46 events. Quite how we packed that many in, I don't know, but the team's quite remarkable in that respect, and countless resources. And if you want to have a look at those, please do go onto the website and check those out. So finally, just looking at those outcomes that I mentioned in a more sort of narrative way. So they're quite wordy because there's a lot more depth to them, but they provide us with plenty of learning and reflection for the project this year, basically. So have we encouraged connected champions? Yes, we now understand we have, because we have had expressions of support for the blueprint, vision and plans, people getting involved, and there's an increased number of people interested in positive changes and actually taking action. So for example, the Himalayan Balsam Action Group, and more people becoming interested in getting involved with putting nature-based solutions on their land and understanding more about how to reconnect the river to their land and these kind of things. That also covers the encouraging blueprint co-creation, as well as working together to meet the challenges and people feeling empowered. And we're starting now to really understand that we're working towards a cohesive and resilient community, with people working together for the benefit of the river, the people and its environment, which takes us back to that overarching ambition with the theory of change. And also finding that there are lots of different ways in which people want to get involved that obviously we hadn't thought about, and how we can now put those into practice during the last year of the project. So that's it from me. Thank you very much indeed for listening. I hope that's been a good whistle-stop tour through the Connecting the Culm project. And if you've got any questions, then please do. As Albert said, if you've not already, because I can't see the chat at the moment, pop them in the chat, or I think, you know, we can do some unmuting and things like that. So I look forward to talking to you a little bit more. Thanks.